here we go. This is Michelle. Now I'm going to mispronounce your last name, so just teach me how to say it.
Gagnon.
Gagnon at the LA Times Festival of Books. Michelle, your trilogy is called the Persephone trilogy. So does that mean, is Noah going to hell and coming back? What's the tie in the Greek mythology that made you call it the Persephone?
Actually, at the very beginning of the book, I stumbled across evidence of a project Persephone. And there are roots actually in the old Greek myth. And my personal favorite thing about the first book, Don't Turn Around, is that poet laureate Rita Dove let me borrow her poem Persephone Falling, which is one of my all-time favorite poems, and it is the epigraph of the book. So the book kicks off with that. Every book starts with a poem about Persephone. So it's called the Persephone series, but actually Persephone for this trilogy is P-E-R-S-E-F, the number 0, and E. So it's Persephone and E because the main characters are hackers.
Speaking of hacking, how did you do research? Did you just call people and say, teach me how to hack? I mean, how did that go?
The great irony here is that I am terrible with computers. I mean, I had two major computer meltdowns. One when I was writing the first book, I had a huge hard drive crash. And the second one was when I was writing the second book on an airplane, and a flight attendant came by and dumped an entire glass of wine onto my laptop. So I basically lost both books.
Oh my God.
Really critical junctures during the course of writing them. I'm really lucky in that I live in San Francisco, which is, in most ways the tech capital of the world. And I have a lot of friends who are much better with computers than I am. So I've just spent, a couple of weeks writing back and forth as I'm writing the third book, asking really specific, detailed questions to a friend of mine who's a computer IT expert. He writes back. I get a little further along. I realize there are more questions. I write him again, and he's really gracious about responding really quickly and clarifying things in, as if he was explaining them to a third grade.
You're like, and can you make that a little simpler? Okay,
I don't even have to tell him that. He just knows.
Now, this book I've seen compared many places to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. So was that an inspiration? Did that even figure at all when you started writing this book?
It was something that the editor that I was talking about when we first started banding about this idea was really gung-ho on. I mean, I think for me the only connection is that Noah is a hacker and she has somewhat of a Scandinavian name. For me, the closest parallel is actually the Bourne identity, because it's someone who wakes up in a strange place with a memory loss. And she knows basically who she is. She just doesn't have the last 3 weeks of her life. And from the minute that the book starts, she is on the run for the entire rest of the book. I mean, there is no rest. Like, every time she thinks she's safe, there's a knock on the door, and she's off and running again. So I always think that that's a better parallel and a better analogy for the book than The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
And then, speaking of the Bourne identity, I think when you're writing conspiracy kind of thrillers, is it hard to walk that line of how can I get into this mythology of conspiracy and this crazy thing going on, and yet keep it realistic? Like, do you ever find, maybe you go too far and have to draw back because you're sounding like Mel Gibson in that crazy movie where he was the conspiracy theorist? Or?
Well, I think what's tricky about this is that it's young adult, and so I was very conscious while I was writing it, because I come from a background of writing adult thrillers, that these kids were not going to be able to do what my FBI agent characters have done in the past, and what my private security characters have done. And so, they're not going to be armed, they're not going to have some of the resources and support networks that the grown-ups have. So I had to really come up with set pieces that were very teen-friendly. So in one of them, Noah is being chased by these 2 armed guys, and she runs into a school where she spent a few months in one of her foster homes, because she knows that this school has very specific lockdown procedures. Right. And the minute that these 2 guys go through the metal detector, they're going to set off the alarm, and those procedures are going to kick into effect. So I tried to come up with clever ways that teens could exploit to their advantage that wouldn't actually be available to adults.
No, absolutely. And, when it comes to writing thrillers, I think so much of the challenge there is in terms of building the suspense and building those pauses and those dramatic moments. And did you have to think about that consciously? Like, did you try to go all Hitchcockian on it, or did it really just happen naturally with the writing of the book?
I don't outline at all. So what happens is I write in a program called Scrivener, where basically everything's kind of broken. Every chapter and scene is broken down. I can see them in a column on the left-hand side. And as the story progresses, if something shifts or changes, and I realize that that's going to alter something that happened 50 pages ago, I go back and I make a note on the index card for that chapter, and I go back and change it. But I really you know, it doesn't happen all that often. Like, especially Don't Turn Around, I wrote in 8 weeks.
Oh my God.
And I barely changed it.
And barely slept.
Yeah, it was just, it came out really fast. It was the easiest book I've ever written. It flowed the most naturally. The story just kind of told itself. And because of that, I think it's probably the lightest edit I've ever done on a book. I took out 2 scenes, like cleaned up the language, but other than that, it's not that different from the very first rough draft to the bound product. I mean, it's the same book.
Gotta love when that happens, right?
I really do. It doesn't happen often.
Now, did you get any pressure? I'm curious because, you know, I try to read a lot of kind of YA thrillers, and they tend to trend towards the paranormal end of the spectrum just because that's so popular. Did you ever get any kind of pressure towards that, or any kind of questions about if we can sell this because it's really not paranormal and that's what's hot right now?
I mean, I actually think that they were really relieved to get something that wasn't paranormal, because I think there's some concern that the young adult market has become so saturated with paranormal and dystopian thrillers.
Oh my God.
And to have something that was really grounded in reality. I mean, there is a little bit of a sci-fi element in that there's this disease that I made up that only affects teenagers. But other than that, you're very much in our world. You're not, you know, on a different planet. There are no fairies. I mean, it's very much our world. And I actually, my editor was really appreciative of that, because I think that there's a glut of the other kind of books out there right now, and I think this is a little bit of a lesson in that.
Yes, it was. As a reader, I wholeheartedly agree. And now, speaking of that virus, what made you decide to kind of make it up wholesale instead of just saying it's a particularly virulent strain of, like, I don't know, some disease that we have today, you know, avian flu or whatever that spinal fluid disease is? What made you decide to go full bore original?
You know, I really wanted something that would mainly affect teens. And that wasn't an easy thing to find. I had a lot of talks with a friend of mine who's an endocrinologist, and we were talking about these wasting diseases like mad cow disease, you know, kind of like encephalitis-based
meningitis stuff.
Exactly. And so she was talking, and we were having a conversation one night after dinner, and she was talking about how we have this Simon plan, which when you're born starts off very small, and then as you're going into, you know, all the transitions of adolescence, it suddenly explodes. Like it grows to several times the size it was when you were born, and then when you hit like between 16 and 18, it shuts off and shrivels over the rest of your life until it ends up smaller than it was when you were born. So it's sort of like this gland that sort of explodes for teenagers, and they're not totally sure what it does. So I thought that was fascinating. And I was like, what if there's a way to kind of tap into that and have a disease that's only affecting teenagers, and where the cure would be very specific. So, you know, I don't want to give too much away, but that was the root of it.
And is that kind of, will the disease figure largely in the rest of the books, and it's still a main part
The
of?
whole thing about the book is finding a cure for the disease, because the cure for the disease is basically, in a lot of ways, the main character holds the key to the cure. And so, it's, you know, it's about that. It's about, you know, for me, it's about this being kind of the plight of foster kids in this country, and the fact that, you know, a lot of times they don't end up with great homes. 40% of them end up homeless after they age out of the system. So there were a lot of themes that I was kind of playing with during this writing.
And last question, can you tease a little bit about what's coming up in book 2? The middle book, the dreaded middle book?
The dreaded middle book. It's so funny because I'm working on book 3 right now. I'm going to have such a hard time not revealing what's happening in book 3. In book 2, basically it starts 3 months after book 1 closes. So it's February. And Noah starts in San Francisco, which is where I live now. And let's just say that there's another kid who's in danger and about to become a victim, and that she is going full board trying to stop it.
All right, I look forward to reading it. So, Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
And have a good festival.
Thank you.